Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and happy Wednesday on a Thursday to our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody is doing well out there this first full week of March. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your non-ho hosts to your Bayou Blitz podcast. Say that fast 5 times. Joining me, is another non-target of Michael Thomas insults. My friend, my partner, my co-host, Brendan Boylan. Brendan, my fellow non-ho host, how are you?
My God. I'm good. I didn't see that one coming. I guess to quote one of my favorite commentators in all of sports and a guy that I know somewhat well in the Charlotte area, Eric Collins, didn't see that one coming. Hum diddly dee. Yeah, but I'm good. Jeff might not be good after some of that Twitter rant from Mike Thomas, and we'll just jump right into it because that's the hottest news of the day, despite other actual football transactions and things going on. The biggest news of the day and what a lot of people focused on is Michael Thomas on X, or the artist formerly known as Twitter. So it all stems from what? The news from Jeff Duncan, an article that was published today that the Saints plan on releasing Michael Thomas, which is first, and I guess we'll get into it, but weird terminology considering that Thomas was on one of those 1-year contracts, voidable years, whatever. So is he really being released or is he just not being re-signed? And I know that was a whole other thing. But this all stems from that article coming out, and it's been pretty well known that Mike Thomas has a dislike for Jeff Duncan, and there have been instances where Jeff Duncan has retaliated, whether it is to defend himself as a journalist or whether it be just because. And there's been bad blood there. I won't point fingers either direction, but there's definitely bad blood there. Very evident. And Mike Thomas took it to a level today that was eye-catching.
To say the least, eye-catching. Leave it to you. Are the far more PG rated of the two of us, to put it that way. But yeah, I mean, Jeff Duncan has given Michael Thomas plenty of ammunition, over the last, I want to say 3 years, maybe longer. And the two of them, as you pointed out, have been going at each other, socially and not very subtly at all, for several years now. It's amped up since last summer, and now on the Michael Thomas hit list. Jeff Duncan's name is on there a couple of times, along with Mickey Loomis, Dennis Allen, Derek Carr. I feel like I'm missing someone, but those are the top names on the Michael Thomas hit list. And like you pointed out, the report, quote unquote, that Michael Thomas was going to be released before the start of the new league year. The wording of that is erroneous. That's just flat out incorrect. Because of a reworked deal between Michael Thomas and the New Orleans Saints last offseason, Thomas's contract was officially going to void at the start of the new league year, which is next Wednesday, March 13th. Therefore making Thomas a free agent. Now, Thomas is still going to be paid by the team because of those voided years. I'm not aware right off the top of my head of the exact number or for how long Michael Thomas will count against the team's salary cap. But essentially the long and the short of it is, if Michael Thomas was on the roster at the start of the new league year, he would have received a hefty roster bonus. If Michael Thomas was on the team by, I think it was week 2, 3, 4 of the regular season, another highly sizable cap hit and bonus towards Michael Thomas. Basically, once you add up all those numbers, if Mike Thomas was on the New Orleans Saints roster, by like week 6 or something of next season, the team would have owed him a total of $119 million. So because of that, that's why the rework deal, and you and I reported it at the time. In fact, we were one of the first to report it, on a podcast, on a video level, and Saints News Network was one of the first to report it on a written publication level, that essentially meant, as of last year, that Michael Thomas was entering his last year as a New Orleans Saint. So that part comes as no surprise whatsoever. The only way Michael Thomas was going to be a Saint in 2024 is if he and the team both agreed again to rework the current deal, to push finances around, and probably Mike Thomas taking a pay cut, adding more voidable years. Yeah, basically a lot of nonsensical language. So in other words, it wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't. The surprising part is how ugly this thing came to an end. It didn't have to be this way. And I'm not pointing the sole finger of blame at Michael Thomas alone. The New Orleans Saints are to blame as an organization. Dennis Allen, Derek Carr, clearly a break in their relationship there. And let's face reality. Mike Thomas really didn't have a good relationship with the New Orleans media. Jeff Duncan specifically, but even more than that, Mike had kind of earned a reputation of being surly at best with most of the local media. Fairly tight-lipped anyway. He would get more loose-lipped on Twitter. As I jokingly called it before the Super Bowl, when his last social media rant was that it almost felt like that this guy drunk tweets, and I'm not accusing him of having a drinking problem or anything silly like that, but that's just the kind of thing, when you're in college, or in my own case, my own personal case, when your collegiate partying years extend into your early 30s, you warn your friends, or you are warned by your friends. Don't drunk text, don't drunk tweet, don't drunk dial. Then it almost feels like Michael Thomas would do that on occasion. But even beyond all that joking, clearly, this ugly end of the relationship between Thomas, the Saints, and the city of New Orleans really, it has come to an ugly end, and that's really a shame.
I agree. To take it a step further, when you're talking about the hit list, I mean, this shouldn't come as a surprise, obviously, the way the contract is worked, but, I'd be one, even though he's not part of the organization anymore, like Sean Payton was on that hit list too.
Yeah.
Like, there was a lot of beef over the last, 4 years, really, since he got hurt the first time in 2020. There was a uncomfortableness to all of it. And it is unfortunate. Say what you will about Michael Thomas. Everybody has their opinions on Michael Thomas, the player, Michael Thomas, the locker room guy. There's a lot of different opinions that get thrown out there, but at the peak of his powers, Mike Thomas was the best receiver in football.
Mm-hmm.
And you could make the case that was one of the best, if not the best, short to intermediate route runner, for in a decade span. Like, he was up there. He was beloved by the fan base in 17, 18, 19.
Yep.
Was a guy that we thought as journalists that he was going to be the face of the franchise following Drew Brees, and him and Alvin Kamara, kind of sharing those duties. Mike was never shy on social media, whether it was responding to people, whether it was retweeting some work that you gave him high praise in, you or me. It's happened to both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the guy was very aware of what people were saying about him.
Yeah.
And as some of this stuff soured, I think Mike Thomas did a little too. Naturally, human thing to do, right? And as it soured between the fans and as it soured between the front office, teammates, and all the way down the ladder, um, you saw a change in Mike. But the one thing that didn't change was when he was on the field, man, he was going to give you everything he had.
Yeah.
And I think that's one reason a lot of people, myself included, loved watching his career here in New Orleans. But to Jeff Duncan's credit, that piece, he did say exactly what you said. It didn't have to end this way. It should not have ended this way. But here we are, right? And I think Mike would even agree to that as well. It shouldn't have ended this way. It could have been avoided. There's a lot of factors that go into that. The injuries have a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
The getting hurt while trying to run up the score, I'm sure, has something to do with that as well. It's unfortunate, like I said, say what you will. He's going to go down as one of the best receivers in team history. If he didn't get hurt, for the multiple seasons that he was hurt, could have made a case if the numbers continued to project his averages that he was going to be a multi-time Pro Bowler, potentially a multi-time All-Pro player, and he certainly could have went down as the greatest receiver in the history of the New Orleans Saints had he stayed healthy. Now, there's a lot of other factors in that. For a couple of years, the Saints didn't have a guy that could play quarterback either. But
Yeah.
All in all, don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's unfortunate the way this is all ending. I personally hope Mike goes and finds success somewhere else. I don't think it's a stretch to say by any means that he's not going to be a number one receiver somewhere. He might not even be a number two receiver somewhere. He might be a situational receiver for a contending football team. And I don't know who it's going to be, but I think somebody would take a flyer on Mike Thomas being a guy who is going to be really good for you on third down, really good for you in the red zone. And I hope him his success. But it's unfortunate the way it ended. Very Mike Thomas-esque to go out the way he has on social media. Certainly made it entertaining for all of us in his final little bit as a New Orleans Saint. But yeah, all in all, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's unfortunate. It shouldn't have ended this way, but that's where we are. And to kind of pivot to guys that are going to be staying in the black and gold, the news that kind of got swept under the rug, forgotten about, read over because of everything that was happening with Michael Thomas this afternoon, is that New Orleans native Tyrann Mathieu, who was entering the final year of a 3-year contract, has signed a 2-year extension that will keep him in New Orleans. That was first reported by Nick Underhill. This is a guy that we were really critical of, Bob, over the first 8 to 10 weeks of his New Orleans Saints career, and then flipped a switch. Something changed. Because Tyrann Mathieu has been as good as advertised for the last, I don't know, year and a half as a New Orleans Saint. Has had his moments, has certainly had his moments where he has been the honey badger that we expected and made big plays defensively. Also has his moments where you're going, oop, that age is showing, or oop, that's a business decision right there. However, to have a veteran on the defensive side of the football like that, that is from the city of New Orleans, wants to be in the city of New Orleans, wants to represent the New Orleans Saints, has championship pedigree, is known as one of the best safeties in football, even at his age now. I think it's a huge get. especially with Marcus May leaving. You don't, and we talked about this when these guys came in together, and that is that ultimately one of the hardest things to do is to bring in 2 new safeties, communication, breakdowns, all those things you saw early on in those two's career in New Orleans.
Mhm.
Did you really want to go through that a second time?
Right.
In however many years. Very smart to lock up Tyrann Mathieu. Somebody just threw it in the comments. It's like coaching for a rookie. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
like having another coach out on the field, whether it be for a rookie, whether it be for a guy like Jordan Howden, who's going to be in his second year with the Saints, and certainly had moments his rookie season that showed the coaching staff and us why they were so high on a 5th round, 6th round pick. You know, a guy that you typically wouldn't be super excited about, but this team was super excited about where they were able to get him. He had his moments, he had his opportunities to shine. Having Tyrann Mathieu in the locker room, in those meetings, breaking down film with you, that's going to be huge on top of whoever else they bring in. And I wouldn't put it past the Saints. Was it last year or the year before? It was one of those quietly the Saints were in play for some safeties. Obviously, last year they signed a ton. You know, Lonnie Johnson, Jonathan Abram. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints go get a couple young guys again this season to bolster the defensive backfield, have a little bit more security on the backside. So I think ultimately getting Tyrann Mathieu back is pretty good. I think they get him back at a pretty good deal, a pretty good rate. And I think that's just as important. You don't want to overpay for a guy at the age of Tyrann Mathieu. I think ultimately the deal works really well for both sides. And it's also nice to see, at least to me, in the culture that we have now of ring chasing. I know Tyrann Mathieu already has his championship, but it's really nice for him to see him go, you know what? I want to sign a contract that could have me end my career in my hometown, opposed to let me try to jump on a team the last year of my contract and try to win another Super Bowl.
That part of the story is certainly heartwarming. But I'll tell you, it actually helps the New Orleans Saints financially too, because as you pointed out, Tyrann Mathieu was headed into the last year of his contract, but because of a restructure last year. There were 3 voidable years added on to the end of that deal. So, in other words, as I pointed out to a couple people, who responded to my article when we posted it this afternoon, that they weren't sure, that they liked the fact that it's a 2-year deal. And I said, listen, this actually saves the Saints because he was going to be on their payroll anyway. Now this 2-year deal for a reported $13 million total, just it lessens that cap hit and spreads it out. So it lessens the cap hit for 2024 and 2025 while keeping an experienced playmaker on the field. And you're doing so when you were going to pay him whether or not he was in uniform for you. Tyrann Mathieu is no longer the player he once was. He's I'm not going to say a liability in man coverage now, but certainly not nearly as strong as he once was. We saw him when he did step into the slot. In those duties last year, we saw teams target him with some reasonable success. Having said that, and the other negative is the business decisions that he often makes as a tackler in open field. And that continued to drive me crazy even last year. But the positive side is Tyrann Mathieu has a load of experience, and you can't coach instincts. And this is one of the most instinctive safeties that the National Football League has ever seen. I'm not putting him among the all-time greats or even a Hall of Fame level. But as far as instincts goes, there haven't been too many that I've ever watched play the position, with better instincts than a Tyrann Mathieu. And those instincts are going to make up for the for the lost step that he might have in man coverage. We saw him bait quarterbacks with great success last year. I expect that to continue. And as you pointed out, he's still going to be a great help to Jordan Howden and whatever other young defensive backs that they bring in. And with them losing Marcus May, I do expect Jordan Howden to be the favorite to be the starter alongside Matthew. But as you kind of hinted at, I still fully expect the Saints to bring in at least one more safety, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was a fairly young second-tier veteran, with some starting experience to kind of bolster the depth of that group. Give them, the Saints defense has always operated best when they've had three capable starting caliber safeties. Right now, you look at this roster, and I realize, some people, including the Saints coaches, are high on Jonathan Abram. I just don't see it. Matthew, Jordan Howden are certainly starting caliber safeties. I don't consider Jonathan Abram or even Lonnie Johnson anything more than situational role players at this stage of their career. So I do believe that safety is still a need, but it becomes a lesser need now that Tyrann Mathieu is locked up for the next year or two.
Throw a couple safety names out at you. Obviously, we'll go into more of an in-depth, free agency preview, not just today, but as we, continue over the next few weeks. Some of the bigger names, Jamal Adams, a free agent, Justin Simmons, who is going to be hitting the market after being let go by Denver. Two guys that are I'm pretty big fans of. Eddie Jackson from Chicago, Budda Baker as well. So there's a couple good ones there, guys that, like you said, have starting experience in the league. But are probably at a point in their career where they could take a little bit of a lesser role or play a little bit of a hybrid role. So the Saints definitely have some options. Let's go.
Bigger name that I know you'd love to have in New Orleans. Jeremy Chin is an unrestricted free agent. A guy I'd love to have in New Orleans, former Buccaneer, played for the Jets the last 2 years. Jordan Whitehead, Pittsburgh boy, went to the University of Pittsburgh as well, as well as high school in this area. But Jordan Whitehead's still a very good safety. I think any of those guys. I mean, I don't think you have to swing for the fences and get a big name like Jamal Adams or Justin Simmons. Simmons would be great. Don't get me wrong. And by the way, played for Denver when Clint Kubiak was on that staff as an offensive assistant, and Joe Woods was on the Denver Broncos staff for Simmons' first 3 or 4 years in Denver. So there's some familiar ties there, but I would expect some team is going to pay Justin Simmons some big money, and I don't see that being the New Orleans Saints.
I don't either. Jeremy Chin's intriguing because of how well he started in Carolina and then how quickly it turned.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, think about how many coaches the Panthers have gone through. Think about how many different schemes you're having to learn. He'd be intriguing at this point, especially if you can get him cheap. He's still young, and has shown some ability to be a playmaker in the league. I'm going to go back to this question. We're going to touch on it super quick and then continue about re-signings, restructures, and all that stuff. And if it didn't come from John Butler, I probably would have just breezed right past it. But I know how John is like a historian of the New Orleans Saints. We're writing a book right now, all that good stuff. So asking, he said, not to beat a dead horse, but where would you rank Mike Thomas all time amongst Saints wideouts? Bob, I'll let you take that one first. In a sentence, where would you put him?
Second, behind Marcus Colston. And the only reason I put Thomas is the better receiver in their prime, but Colston did it for longer. I love Joe Horn. I love my guy Quinn Early. Really love a couple other Saints receivers, Lonzel Hill, a couple guys like that. nowhere near Michael Thomas's or Marcus Colston's class. I put Colston first above only Michael Thomas because of the longevity. Other than that, Mike Thomas is the second best receiver production-wise and probably the first best ability-wise in New Orleans Saints history.
I think I'm right there with you. 1 being Colston, 2 being Thomas, 3 being Joe Horn. Hard for me not to throw Horn above Mike Thomas, and a lot of that has to do with Mike Thomas's health. But you take Joe Horn's best season versus Mike Thomas's best season, and we know where that's going. And same with what you said. Colston gets up there because of the longevity. He's the greatest player to never make a Pro Bowl. It's an absolute joke. Got to say that. That is I have to say that, right? It's in the contract. Every time Marcus Colston gets brought up, have to bring that up. Should be a Hall of Famer. But yeah, I think I'm in the same boat with you. But got to share some love to Joe Horn as well. All right. Well, Bob, other things going on, other moves happening for the New Orleans Saints, some other things still up in the air. So, for the people who did not join us last Friday, because we have been moving this show all over lately, what's been the latest with the New Orleans Saints in terms of re-signings, restructures, and what have you?
We hit the Tyrann Mathieu, re-signing. Obviously we opened the show talking about Michael Thomas, piggyback that with the imminent release of Marcus May. That won't become official until the start of the new league year, which coincides with the start of free agency on March 13th. Also today, the Saints added a fullback, a young man by the name of Xander Horvath, which is going to be a fun name to say if he actually makes the team. Kid, I remember watching him at Purdue. Because I like watching Big Ten football, like watching Boilermakers football. A good sized kid, 6'3", 230, decent blocker from what I could recall seeing on film. But he surprised scouts in the draft process going in 2022 draft. With his ability to catch the football out of the backfield. And he did have. A little bit of success with that. His rookie year with the Chargers, who drafted him in the 7th round. Last year, bounced around the practice squads of a couple different teams. But I throw that out there as a pass-catching fullback because you and I talked about this as soon as Clint Kubiak got hired. Alan Ulrich and I talked about this, too, a couple times on Under the Dome, especially Alan. Clint Kubiak has always loved an athletic pass-catching fullback. Not just Clint Kubiak, but the Kubiak, Shanahan, Rick Dennison system. Kyle Juswick is the latest example out of San Francisco, but you go all the way back to Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak, the way they used Howard Griffith. For those John Elway, Terrell Davis teams. And there's a couple other fullbacks that have had success in this kind of system. Will Xander Horvath be that kind of guy? I don't know. Only time will tell. But I do believe he's an athletic upgrade over Adam Prentice, the fullback the last 2 or 3 years. Prentice is a free agent, but a restricted free agent. So the Saints kind of hold the cards on whether he's going to come back or not. And then it wouldn't be February or March. Unless we talked about Saints restructures, and they've restructured the contracts, over the last few weeks of Derek Carr, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Cam Jordan, of course, Carl Granderson, and Nathan Shepard. I feel like I'm missing one, but really all those restructures, the Saints have only had to release Marcus May to get close to salary cap compliant. There's still, I think, about $8 million in the red once you factor in Cam's restructure and May's release. But I mean, that they're going to restructure Demario Davis because they always do. And there's a couple other minor moves that they could make restructure or rework wise. This team will be cap compliant by March 13th and will be able to clear up enough room to at least sign some free agents.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be a year where you see the Saints make a major splash, but I've also said that before, and they go and they make a major splash somehow by moving money. I don't see this being a year that they do
right.
Do that, but Only time will tell. Let's get some more questions. Curse of Dennis Allen over on X, or the artist formerly known as Twitter, asks, if the Saints start out flat, do they give DA more time to gel with the team? Bob and I have addressed this question or similar questions a lot. And this is what it boils down to. And Bob, you can fact check me and all that good stuff with these numbers and whatnot. But very rarely do the Saints make an in-season head coaching move. Twice.
Twice in their whole history. And both times were in the 1970s with John Mecomb as owner. Since I almost said Bud Adams for some reason. I don't know where my head is at. Since Tom Benson, officially took over ownership duties in 1986, the Saints have never made fired a head coach, during the season. They've had one resign. Two resign, excuse me. They've had two resign, Bum Phillips and Jim Mora, but none have ever been fired. None have been given any less than 3 seasons to prove themselves. Dennis Allen is going into his 3rd season. So to answer your question, I guess in a long-winded way, personally, because they restructured Derek Carr to come back. In other words, they committed themselves to Derek Carr for at least one more season. They made the changes on offense, as far as the offensive coaching staff. So I think if this team, unless they suffer a ridiculous rash of injuries to start the year, as long as they're relatively healthy, but they come out 0-4, 1-5, I think at that point, because of the just bitter ire that the Saints fandom feels towards Dennis Allen, and as a result, this organization, if this team gets off to a horrible start, I wouldn't actually be surprised to see them make a move. It's out of character, but an analogy that I used a lot towards the end of the regular season, the mob and the flaming torches are at the castle wall. And there's holding off that mob right now, Mickey Loomis and Gail Benson. There's only so long that you can do that, before they start, with the ladders, at the Alamo coming over the wall. And if you get off to a really, really, really bad start, like I said, somewhere in the 0-4, 1-5 range, I almost think you have to make a move.
I'm on the opposite end of that. I think he gets the full year regardless. I don't think it really matters what happens. I think excuses will be made.
I mean, that's in character, as we both know.
So, to answer your question, I think he gets as much time as he needs. And if this ship really sinks by the end of the year, okay, let him go at the end of the year. But I think he gets the full year regardless. And it's kind of one of those situations, until the Saints prove otherwise to me, why would I believe anything else?
Good point.
Second question from Curse Dennis Allen. Marshawn Lattimore. I say this is the last of the current roster we addressed tonight before we get into some free agents. That's a tough one because the way they restructured all that makes it really easy to move off of.
Mm-hmm.
However, and I've said this for the however many years Marshawn Lattimore has been a rumored trade target. It is really hard to find a lockdown corner of Lattimore's caliber in this league. It just is, right? I don't know if I'd go as far to say Marshawn Lattimore is going to be a Hall of Famer because we don't see a lot of defensive backs in the Hall of Fame as is. But when you think of Marshawn Lattimore, you're thinking of, you think of some of the best lockdown corners of the last 20 years. One of them just got in the Hall of Fame, Darrelle Revis. That's how hard it is, right? I mean, think, honestly, and even football minds or people that cover football for a living, like Bob and I, when I say shutdown corner, and I think recent shutdown corners, first two to come to mind for me are Darrelle Revis and Richard Sherman. That's still a while ago. Like, I know for some of you, you're like, oh yeah, that was like yesterday. Like, no, like prime for those two was like a decade ago, which I know. I'm getting to that point too, Bob, where you blink and a decade's gone. But regardless, it's really hard to find lockdown corners in this league. I think it would be silly because even when he was healthy last year, Lattimore was really, really good.
Mhm.
I think it'd be really silly to move off of them for what they would get back.
Yeah.
Right? Because it would be different if you're talking, you're getting a first and some other things from Marshawn Lattimore. Okay, I'd entertain it potentially. But in all actuality, what are you going to get from Marshawn Lattimore? Like a third round, like you're getting a day 2 or day 3 pick. At best, you're getting a day 2 pick. Like a third round pick. I don't see a team coughing up a second rounder for Marshawn Lattimore. But that's just the nature of it.
Right.
I don't. It's not that because he's not worth that. I just don't think teams across the league. Okay, I gotta backtrack with this explanation a little bit. I don't know what it is, but it's all American sports that draft picks are like literal gold
Mhm.
or diamonds. Now, when you go back and you look at draft history for teams, you realize that hitting in the draft is really damn hard. Like, it's not easy. But for whatever reason, GMs treat draft picks like, well, that's who you save a lot of money when you draft a guy and you're not having to go into the free agency market. But GMs hoard those things
Mhm.
and they grab it and they look at it and they have their little, Lord of the Rings moment, and it's my precious or whatever. Like that's how they look at draft picks. So I don't believe that there's going to be a GM in the league that goes, I want to give up a first round pick for a defensive back. I just don't. I don't see that in modern NFL. I would find it really hard pressed to find a GM that goes, I want to give out a second round pick for a Marshawn Lattimore, regardless of whether he's a top corner in the league or not. So why trade him? Is there really that much beef with some of the top players in New Orleans over the last few years? I don't know. I guess there is, because Mike Thomas is making it seem like there's beef with
Yeah.
everybody. But Lattimore, there's been this kind of quiet. It hasn't been very public, but it's been a very quiet nudge. Might be the right word. You're getting a little elbow from somebody that there might be a problem
Mhm.
with Lattimore and the front office, Lattimore coaching, whatever it may be. And we get that same nudge, not maybe as aggressive of a nudge, but you're starting to get some of that nudge with Alvin Kamara as well. I think some of that's more fan driven, but you're
Yeah.
still getting a little bit of a nudge that, well, maybe there's some issues here with some of these guys that were supposed to be the cornerstone pieces after Drew Brees. It could be more frustration of not winning games. It could be a lot of things. But why you would give up a guy like that baffles me. Why that's even remotely in the conversation baffles me. And we've talked about this too. If you take Lattimore out of the equation, are you comfortable with the corners the Saints have? Yes and no. But it'd be a hell of a lot better to have those guys that are still progressing, still young, still making strides. Debo had a great year. Alontae Taylor had a little bit of a roller coaster year, but he had his highs just as he had his lows. Be a lot better to have those guys in their positions with Lattimore there as well.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And Alan and I talked about this on Tuesday. You are a much better football team with Marshawn Lattimore on your roster than you are with him off it. It's as simple as that. Paulson and Debo, I'm a big fan of. I'm a huge fan of Alontae Taylor. And by the way, people, before those people that are really down on Taylor for having a rocky, a little bit of an erratic season, he was basically playing it out of position. And B, you same people that were praising Paulson Adebo last year wanted the team to get rid of Adebo after Adebo had a rocky second year. So remember that. But neither of those guys are Marshawn Lattimore. And I'll just come out and say it. My opinion, Marshawn Lattimore is the best defensive back, not just cornerback. He's the best defensive back to ever put on a New Orleans Saints uniform. And he is still playing, as you pointed out, at a very high level. Now, it's worth pointing out he has missed 17 of the last 34 games because of injuries. And there are people not so subtly questioning each of the last 2 years his desire to get back onto the field. I've openly wondered about it, but I'm not questioning it because we aren't behind closed doors. So we don't know the true answer to that question. And because we don't know the true answer to that question, we also don't know the amount of discord, disharmony, if there is any, between Lattimore and the coaches or Lattimore and the front office. And that right there would go a long way towards determining how badly the Saints feel they need to move on from Marshawn Lattimore. Because financially, the Saints don't need to move away from him at all. Trading him this year, first of all, they'd have to designate him as a post-June 1st trade, which means you're not going to get any draft picks back this year for him. We just got done talking about the likelihood that Dennis Allen needs to have a good season to save his job. Whether he's given the full season or not is irrelevant. He needs to have a good full season, a good year to make sure he comes back for a fourth year. Well, stockpiling draft picks in 2025 while getting rid of your best players now is not the best recipe to do that. And even if you do designate Lattimore for a post-June 1st trade, he's still going to count about $13 million against your cap this year. Now, moving on from Lattimore on the field, it allows you to do this. It allows you to move Alontae Taylor back outside where he's more comfortable, and it allows you to sit down with Paulson Adebo and start ironing out a long-term contract, potential long-term contract. Because remember, Adebo's coming into a contract year. That's a big decision to make. And I'm not so sure that you're going to be able to pay Adebo when you're paying Lattimore as well. So that's why a trade of Lattimore could happen. But again, it doesn't have to happen. And therefore, the Saints aren't going to get rid of him for a day 3 pick. They might not even do it for a day 2 pick because, again, you don't have to. And as far as value goes, a couple big cornerback names that have been traded in recent years will give you an idea of where the Marshawn Lattimore trade market lies. Stephon Lattimore was traded from New England to Carolina in 2021 for a 6th-round pick. He was traded from Indianapolis to Dallas in 2023 for a 5th-round pick. Now, to be fair, Stephon Gilmore is 4 years older than Lattimore. Darius Slay, also 4 years older than Lattimore, in 2020 was traded from Detroit to Philadelphia for a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick. Marcus Peters, who has declined sharply, but 4 or 5 years ago was considered one of the top corners in the league. Peters in 2018 traded from Kansas City to the Rams for a 2nd and a 4th. 2019 traded from the Rams to Baltimore for a 5th and a backup linebacker. And this is the comparison everybody should be making. Jalen Ramsey, who a lot of people believe is better than Marshawn Lattimore. I don't. I'd take Lattimore slightly over Ramsey, but that's a matter of opinion. Jalen Ramsey, 2019, traded from the Jaguars to the Rams for 2 firsts and a 4th. But 2023, Jalen Ramsey traded from the Rams to the Dolphins for a 3rd-round pick and a backup tight end. Other than the first trade with Jalen Ramsey, all those other trades were for at best a late day 2 pick. That's pushing it. And again, the Saints don't need to get rid of him. Having said that, if the Detroit Lions or the Jacksonville Jaguars, two teams who have ties with Lattimore on their coaching staff, they come calling for a first-round pick, I think if you're the New Orleans Saints, you make it. But I think that's a stretch that's going to happen.
Yeah, like I said, I think, and you provided a lot of recent comps on top quality defensive backs and getting traded. I still think the best they get's a late day 2 pick offered, right? And at that point, why? Why would you do it? Why would you do it? Last 10 minutes, let's pick a position here, Bob, to kind of talk about free agency. We'll continue on. As we go through the draft, because as you guys know, and as some of you guys get frustrated, there are multiple waves to this. It's not like it's not like free agency opens and the Saints are done. There's going to be multiple waves of this. And a team like New Orleans, who's going to have potentially limited cap, they're going to wait till like wave 3 to really start making moves. So this is going to be an ongoing thing. Bob, I want to start offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
Right, a lot of restructuring. Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz. Some questions regarding Ryan Ramczyk's health, even though the Saints seem optimistic. Anytime you talk about knees and dudes that weigh 300 pounds, start raising a few eyebrows. Andrus Peat, the big name, that is an unrestricted free agent. Bob, when you look at this this free agent class for offensive linemen, particularly interior of the offensive line, where do you look? And because of these restructures that we've seen the last few days, we'll call it week and a half, do you think the Saints' mindset in going and potentially looking for an interior offensive lineman changes?
Brendan, I actually do. A lot of people are talking about the Saints should or will target an offensive tackle in the draft, early in the draft, either round 1 or round 2. And I'm one of those people. I believe that they do. The reason it's an offensive tackle is because tackles rarely hit the free agent market in their prime. Usually teams either lock them up, franchise tag them, stuff like that. You rarely see a guy hit the market in their prime. Guards are a different story. Guards. I'm not going to say a lot of guards hit the market in their prime, but it's a slightly lower valued position. So if the Saints make a move early in free agency, and when I say early, I mean right out of the gate on Wednesday, when it officially starts, or like a Thursday signing, basically before the weekend is early in free agency. I believe that it'll be a guard, and there's a few names out here. Robert Hunt is the guy I would really love to have from the Miami Dolphins. 27 years old, part of a good Dolphins offensive line, both run blocking and pass protection. Jonah Jackson from the Lions going to hit the free agent market. Connor Williams, also of the Dolphins. Kevin Zeitler, a little bit older, but still pretty skilled, from the Ravens. Dalton Risner from the Vikings. Notable because Risner has played for Clint Kubiak for 2 seasons, not with the Minnesota, but with the Denver Broncos. So, he kind of knows what Clint Kubiak wants to do and Rick Dennison want to do with that offensive line. Laken Tomlinson, just released by the Jets, is another name out there. Cody Whitehair, a guy that could play guard or tackle, just released by the Bears as well. So, any of those names I believe would be a significant upgrade, for the Saints interior line. And, frankly, I expect the team to go after one of those names early in free agency. I believe that this is where the Saints are going to look to spend their free agent money, at least early on.
Those last 2 names that you said were towards the top of my list. Laken Tomlinson, the former Duke guard, and I think Cody Whitehair is a guy that I'm really going to keep my eye out on, particularly because of the versatility. You look at what the Saints have done in terms of bringing in reserve offensive linemen over the last 10 years, maybe. There's always a guy that can play multiple positions. James Hurst, the most recent example of that. I could see the Saints going after a guy who has some veteran leadership, early 30s, guy who can play multiple positions and be a plug and play guy. Because let's face it, it used to be just the Andrews Pete joke, but it seems like there's always someone hurt on this offensive line. And it's not just a Saints problem, it's a league problem. Because let's face it, our friend Kyle Turley said it to us in one of our more recent conversations with him. It's like running headfirst into a brick wall 100 to 1,000 times a day. You're
Hmm.
bound to get hurt, whether it's your head or somewhere else. If you're running into a brick wall that many times, you're bound to get hurt. You need that type of depth on the offensive line. And frankly, the Saints missed it last year. Now, let's not forget Nick Saldiveri, the draft pick
Hmm.
last season, didn't get a whole lot of run, but he's a guy who's definitely going to be competing for that reserve role or that sixth offensive lineman role. But how much do you value Andrews Pete after last season for New Orleans, and certainly with the questions in the air regarding Trevor Penning?
I'll tell you, I think the Saints value Pete quite a bit. You're not going to see an astronomical contract offered to him. Andrews Pete almost saved the New Orleans Saints season, if you ask me, uh, because remember, Pete basically took over Penning's left tackle spot. In what, week 6, week 7, going into that Jacksonville Thursday night game, and we saw an immediate and significant improvement from the offensive line. Now with Andrews Pete, you are always talking about the potential injury specter just around the corner. But Pete played better than he had the last 3 or 4 years, and really doing so at left tackle, a position he really hadn't played much since 2018, 2019, those years that he would replace Teron Armstead for 4 or 5 games at left tackle when Armstead would get hurt. Do you offer Pete top echelon money? No, absolutely not. Not at this stage of his career. Not when there's younger guards available in free agency. But I do believe that this team tries to make a run to bring back Andrews Pete in a Saints uniform. Ideally, it'd be a 2-year deal. Worth $10 to $15 million total. And that's maximum.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being a range for Pete. Do I see someone overpaying for Pete, though? I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
I don't think so. I think it is more likely that someone would overpay on a 1-year contract for Pete than it would be a multi-year contract. And when I say overpay, we're not talking like astronomical numbers. But someone who pays a little bit higher than market value, you could look at a team that is going to be a contender that might be missing a guy who could play, the both spots. I just talked about the versatility being like the sixth offensive lineman. I don't know if Pete is ready to forego his potential of being a starter in the NFL. But there are guys that hit that point in their career in their 30s that go, you know what? I would rather be the sixth guy on the offensive line for a team that's going to compete for a Super Bowl than I would being the starting tackle for a team that has not made the playoffs the last few seasons. And also, you got to think about it too. What is one thing we've heard from all the players we've talked to over our careers, Bob, is that you know your body's an investment,
Mm-hmm.
and if you can avoid in your 30s taking as many hits as a starter by being the sixth man, I mean that's appealing too. I can't speak for Andrews Pete. I'm not in his brain, but those are things that would certainly be going through my brain when some of those offers come across. But I agree. I think the Saints are going to have to, whether they like it or not. And I think Pete played really well last year. I think they're going to have to prioritize him. And if they don't, that shows me that they have some really new belief in Trevor Penning.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think you have to prioritize him because we don't know about Ryan Ramczyk.
Right.
Could you kick Pete out to the right side? And we've talked about this a lot. This has been a topic a lot more this year than probably any other year that you and I have worked together is, the difficulties of playing the left side versus the right side. It wouldn't be an easy transition, but having a guy that you could kick out to the right if Ramczyk was going to be hurt and get some decent play out of, it's better than looking down the roster and going, who could play right tackle? Because that's kind of where the Saints are right now. Outside of Ramczyk, there's not a secure guy that you're like, you know what, I really feel comfortable with him playing right tackle for a potential extended period of time. It's not going to be Trevor Penning. If Penning plays at all for the Saints next year, it's going to be on the left side.
Yep.
Pete could potentially bounce out to the right, but there's not a lot of and even in Bob's face says it all. Like, it's potentially could.
Remember where Andrus Pete was drafted. He was drafted to play right tackle. And he was awful there. Zach Strief, he couldn't beat out Zach Strief, and they essentially drafted Pete to replace Strief. Couldn't do it. Pete bounced around a lot. Played reasonably well at left tackle, better there than at right tackle when they gave him his shot there. But Andrus Pete really didn't find a home until they moved him inside permanently in 2017, I believe that was. So the option to move Pete to the right side, I doubt it. I think it's more likely that if they had the shuffle, we would see similar to what they did last year. Put Pete in at left tackle, and if something happens to Ramczyk, work out either a Cam Irving, in other words, a street free agent, or in a pinch move James Hurst out there. But nonetheless, Pete's ability to play a couple positions, guard and left, either guard spot and left tackle, does give you flexibility with your other offensive linemen.
Absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not the Saints really go hard at this in the first wave. They might not get their guy in the first wave, but certainly some of those reports of offers, I think, are going to be something that we all really keep our eyes on when it comes to this position. Bob, we're going to have so much more to talk about when it comes to free agency, but we get to be fun and we get to come on live on Wednesday of next week. Perfect timing. Yeah, you guys heard it here. We're actually going to have a live show when we're supposed to have a live show. Lord willing, all things bearing, I take the blame for this week with traveling and just not knowing whether or not I was going to be in a place where I could securely do a podcast. We had that little scare, was it last week or the week before, where I was flying back and my flight got delayed, and I'm like texting Bob, I don't know, we're gonna have to move it.
Yeah,
I didn't want to do that back-to-back weeks, so I was like, let's just move it. Let's just in case.
TSA nemesis Brendan Boylan.
Yes, TSA nemesis Brendan Boylan. It wasn't me, man. I didn't even check a bag. Also, for you guys who don't travel a whole lot, if you're unaware, TSA's rules and regulations change depending on the state.
Yeah.
No rhyme or reason. You would think that a government-funded operation would just have all across the country, everybody's under the same rules. Nope. Nope. I can fly from one place to another and then fly straight back, and the rules have just magically changed. But I digress. Bob and I have a lot to talk about with free agency. We're excited to bring that to you next Wednesday. In the meantime, Bob Rose has written a lot of articles lately, which means you guys have a lot of articles to read by Bob Rose, not just today, throughout the week, throughout the upcoming weeks, throughout the offseason. And I know Bob's starting to get a little antsy as we get a little bit closer to draft coverage because he has so many player profiles to get out to you guys. So, Bob, where can everybody follow you, your off-season work, and most importantly, at least in my opinion, because we do it together every year, follow your draft coverage?
First of all, folks, thank you for tuning in with us, especially those of you who follow when we are going to move our show weekly. We appreciate your patience and love you for your support, and continue to do that by not only you yourself following, but also get other Saints fans, other football fans involved with the Bayou Blitz Facebook group and Bayou Blitz Twitter page at Bayou Blitz Pod. To follow me individually, you can do so. Bob Rose on Facebook, at Bobby R2613 over on Twitter, and all of us, myself, John Hendricks, Kyle Mosley, Ross Jackson, at the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter, or the SI.com team page. And indeed, we have already written several pieces, regarding free agency. Over the next couple days, I started with defensive. Excuse me. I'm sorry, guys. Started with defensive ends today. But through the weekend and up to Wednesday, I'm going position by position for potential targets that I see for the Saints, at each of those specific positions. Not necessarily, in fact, probably not the top tier ones, but more affordable guys, or guys that made players that make sense for their system, for their team, for their financial situation. So, just stay tuned for that. We don't give you fake news. We don't give you clickbait. We report the news when we get the news. We are your source for more often than not. We specify the difference between an editorial, a prediction, and actually breaking news. So be very careful who you follow, what you listen to, and who you retweet this time of year. And just make sure it's the Saints News Network. We won't steer you wrong. You might disagree with our predictions sometimes, but we aren't going to lead you in the wrong direction.
For myself, you can follow me at BT Boylan on virtually everything. Make sure you keep up with the Saints News Network, Bob and John and Kyle and Ross during this time. Like Bob said, I know those guys aren't going to lead you astray. I got to work closely with those guys for a handful of years. I know how the processes work. They're going to give you the most up-to-date coverage. A lot of time they're going to break news. And like Bob said, you just got to be careful, especially this time of year, and especially on X or on Twitter or whatever you guys still call it, because you have a lot of fake accounts and people who change names, change profile pictures. The one that I saw today, got a lot of people, was Michael Penix Jr. Someone changed their profile to the Michael Penix Jr. and tweeted, I want to be a Saint or something like that. And people bought it. And I said, I'm thinking, how, guys? Like, you think a draft prospect is going to tweet that a month and a half before the draft? Because there's a ton of teams that are going to be like, well, if you don't want to be here, we're not going to pick you. It just kills your draft stock. Like, somebody's agent would have had no agent by the end of the day. The agent would have quit. Like, that would have been it.
Well, I had a guy. I don't remember whether he messaged. It was just today. Whether he messaged me privately or commented on the post of one of my other articles. But he said, hey Bob, I heard, I read that the Saints are interested in Chase Young, and I kind of chuckled to myself, and I pulled up an article and I sent it to him. That was written 2 days ago. I said, "Is this the piece you're talking about?" He said, "Yeah, that's the one." And I said, "Well, A, I wrote it. And B, I didn't write that the Saints are interested in Chase Young. I read that why the Saints could be interested in Chase Young." So again, guys, don't comment on the titles. Take 2 minutes, click that little link, and read it. Then you may comment.
I think that's fair. I think
please and thank you.
Yeah, fair trade-off, right? Fair trade-off. But it's that time of year, right? Like, there are going to be articles all over the place about anything. But Bob's going to write you a lot on why the Saints could be a dark horse for this guy, that guy, or that guy. And, frankly, we don't know. But there are reasons the Saints are going to be interested in some of these players. Just like there's going to be 30 other teams that are interested in some of these guys. So just pay attention closely. Make sure you're looking at who's writing what. But in the meantime, Bob and I will be back next Wednesday right here, Bayou Blitz, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, really about 9:05. We're really excited for free agency. We're really excited for the draft. We're excited to continue to grow with each and every one of you. So until next Wednesday, hope you guys find some peace, spread love, practice positivity, and we'll see you then for another episode of the Bayou Blitz. See you then.